Wow, wow, wow. That's a lot of wow.
It's a lot of wow. So I think he's. I think it's great he's out there, and I think it's great as someone who worked with him. And no,
Right.
there you can count on one hand the number of people who had conversations like that with Trump about the Russia investigation, and who saw him in person be completely unfazed by the idea that Russia interfered with the election. Didn't ask how we're going to stop it. Didn't say how should we punish him.
Yeah.
And said, "Boy, what's my vulnerability? How should we
Yeah.
defend this?"
Yeah.
So incredibly damning. And then Trump turns around and fires him. And then when he has that meeting with the Russian envoy and say, "Oh boy, I just fired Comey. I was getting so much pressure. I just fixed it." So all of that is incredibly damning. I still have major problems with how
Yeah.
Comey handled the Clinton email situation. So, I think he's an important voice to have out there. He's not, he's still not getting a Christmas card from me.
Yeah. No, me neither.
So,
And it's interesting. Amy Siskin tweeted the same thing we were talking about, Eric. She said, media, I hope some of the future interviews with Comey will involve questions about how Rudy Giuliani knew in advance and telegraphed on Fox News. The news was coming on Hillary just before it did. This needs to be asked. I mean, that and why he sat on the Russia investigation if he felt such a duty to warn about the Hillary investigation, right?
yeah, and his Hillary stuff hasn't been particularly edifying. He seemed to suggest in the book that he thought she was going to win, and therefore she would be seen as illegitimate if this came out afterwards, and things like that. As I tweeted this morning, notice it was only men in D.C.
Yeah.
Whether the DOJ, media, politics, etc. Only men were concerned that Hillary would be seen as illegitimate, and they had to scramble. The New York.
And meanwhile, Trump
Yeah.
is seen as wholly illegitimate because of the decisions Comey made, right?
Right, exactly. No one. There was such a massive double standard that we've talked about endlessly. But that's just another layer that all these men were scrambling on the eve of a woman becoming president. Either convincing or telling themselves they needed to do X, Y, or Z because she wouldn't be legitimate. But in general, and we've talked about this, and I've tweeted about this endlessly. If you go back to October of 2016, everyone thought she was going to win, and everyone in the D.C. bubble, particularly the media, saw it as their job to make sure she limped across the finish line, to make sure it was not a feel-good victory, to make sure she was, they were kind of snapping at her heels. That was the narrative.
Yep.
The most important thing was that Hillary Clinton not have a feel-good victory. And so lots of people did lots of things to make sure that happened. And now we're still paying the price for that because some of the people that did things was James Comey.
Yeah. Well, and you also, you tweeted the New York Times editorial board saying GOP must take a stand to protect the Russia investigation. You say this arrived 14 months late. I keep making this point, but the New York Times basically wasted an entire year of Trump coverage by endlessly profiling his supporters and pretending Trump has any effing clue as to what he's doing as president. It just all of this stuff comes back to haunt us, doesn't it, Eric? Like remembering that someone actually said Hillary was too overprepared in one of the debates. It's just...
Well, and I've tweeted this Washington Post column many times from like 10 days before the election. It was, if Hillary wins, nonstop scandal for 4 years. That New York Times editorial is kind of tied into the Comey thing in that on the big picture, I'm glad they're here. I'm glad they've arrived at the party. We've been waiting for people for 15 months. We've been waiting for the New York Times to drop this ridiculous timidity, to drop the ridiculous, well, he's president, so if he says something, we have to pretend it's real for a news cycle until we knock it down. Why the New York Times editorial page it hasn't been calling him a pathological, unstable liar for the last 15 minutes. I don't know. It's all because of the etiquette police.
Thank you. And by the way, we've had Joe Scarborough on this show. I'm glad he's come around.
Yep.
But you're right. Like, you can't get away from your complicity, not him just personally, but you're right, the whole media. Because I love that now they throw in, along with Russia and the FBI, they throw in, oh, and Hillary ran a bad campaign, or she was a bad candidate. I'm like, really? despite all of that, she broke a 200-year barrier and won by 3 million votes. I mean, really, that's a bad campaign. I think that's the thing they throw in to kind of exonerate themselves for how complicit they were in this coverage of her, right?
Yeah, and the good news, the New York Times has finally stopped running profiles of Trump voters. I mean, I think they probably did 30 or 40 of them.
Right.
And they, like I said in that tweet, they wasted an entire year fawning over Trump supporters instead of focusing on the fact that he is completely incapable of becoming president. I mean, I was right. I noted the endless stories I read in the New York Times for the first year of the Trump presidency, talking about how Trump is mulling over this immigration policy, talking about how Trump is meeting with aides to decide health care reform. We now know, everyone now knows, he doesn't understand 2 sentences of any of that. He never met with aides to mull over health care reform.
Yeah.
He was completely clueless. And now that he's fired all these people, the Times and the D.C. press is starting to concede what you and I knew from day one.
Right.
This guy is a fraud. He's in over his head, has no idea what he's talking about. He's wandering around the halls of the White House, and that's how, quote, policy is being.
Yeah. And I mean, now this attack on Comey is, as you've commented on, Eric, like these are people that work for Donald Trump that are talking about someone else's credibility.
Right.
And I don't ever recall a White House press secretary attacking someone in such personal terms, calling James Comey a partisan hack. I'm like, if by partisan hack you mean Republican that threw the election to Trump, right? I mean...
Yeah, I mean, when she was reading that prepared statement on Friday, I just, you laugh because you want to cry, but I was laughing because I read a piece in Politico last Monday, and it said the White House doesn't really have a strategy for Comey. He was supposed to be in Peru at the end of last week, and they thought he might stay above the fray because he'd be on another continent. He, of course, canceled his trip to Peru in the Latin summit, and he was home brooding on the West Wing, tweeting out all this stuff. And the article also mentioned the White House didn't even bother to come up with a strategy to deal with Comey because Trump would just obliterate it with a tweet.
Yeah,
so,
and even for him, this tweet storm. What was the one this morning about how many crimes accusing Comey, McCabe, everybody of committing crimes? You talk about it. They echo it on Fox that Comey. One guest you said denounced Comey as very disturbed and someone who should be sitting in prison. I mean,
right.
I mean, these charges are just so outrageous, aren't they?
They are, and yet here we are. We got the word. There was an NBC report. Was it Friday afternoon? Rosenstein was going to be gone soon. Everyone was bracing, and it continues to be fascinating. I mean, he just lashes out at this investigation and refuses to pull the trigger. And it took him about 2 days to decide he was going to fire Mueller last year, and he did it. We're now in month 5 of this. And it's kind of fascinating in a morbid way, what is stopping him from doing it? Is he actually listening to people, whether it's Grassley or other senators saying, or Lindsey Graham saying it would basically be the end of your presidency? He doesn't seem to put much stock in logic and things like that.
Right.
But maybe in this case it is. But it just becomes, the boy who cries wolf. I mean, it's just endless.
And
what are you going to do about it? If you're not going to do anything, shut up and do something else.
Yes, exactly. Quickly, though, I mean, the one thing I said over and over is, like, he's going to start a war to distract. And sure enough, your headline is Fox News hints to Trump bombing Syria could distract from the Comey book. I mean, as you're saying, there's one Fox guest looked directly into the camera to address Trump, urging him to bomb Syria. You said that on Fox and Friends, they said, if the president decides to strike Syria, don't you think that story would be a bigger story than Comey's book? I mean, and the other headline I'm looking at is Trump sought advice on Syria from legal team defending him in Russia probe. What more evidence do we need that everything is connected to Trump-Russia, right?
Well, if he's taking Middle East advice from Sean Hannity, why not take it from his criminal defense attorney? I mean, it makes it's all they're all part of the same orbit in Trump's mind. Look, the only good news with the Syria strike was that apparently Mattis would only go along with something incredibly limited.
Right.
And it had to be incredibly limited to get the UK and France on board. So the whole thing was a complete waste of time, as everyone knew it would be. So there are still those guidelines in place, whether it's Mattis or international.
Well,
so it's not like Trump has gone full blown, rodeo cowboy.
Well, and the Washington Post story last night, of course, they're talking about Trump being at basically full-on war with over how to deal with Russia. That he's screaming at people about
right.
Expelling diplomats and sanctions. I mean, what more evidence do we need that Putin's got something on him, right?
Well, he acts like a very guilty man all the time, and so now, and we haven't even talked about the Cohen raid from last week, which was, is going to reverberate for weeks and months. And of course, that takes it out of the realm of, and we haven't talked about Scooter Libby, because the New York, obviously the New York investigation takes it out of the realm of pardons and things like that. So he really does seem cornered. And as the Rob Reiner, tweet you mentioned, I mean, there does seem to be a sense of the next chapter.
Yeah.
And we're all hoping for that next chapter. And I think things are really going to speed up in May and June in terms of the Mueller office. And once they kind of unleash or start, telling everyone what they know, I think it's just going to be, people are going to be amazed.
Game over, man. Game over.
And then, well, here's one quick point.
Yeah.
Republicans, everyone says, we saw this with the Paul Ryan retirement last week. The Republicans will not stand up to Trump because they're afraid of a right-wing primary challenger. Instead, they retire because they're going to lose in November.
Right.
I mean, this is an amazing paralysis the Republicans have created. They have attached themselves to Trump.
Right.
They won't detach him because of political pressure, and they know by remaining attached they're going to lose in November.
Yeah.
It's just amazing to watch.
It's fantastic. All right. Thank you, Eric. See you next week.
Have a great week.
All right. There he goes. Game over, man.
Game over, man. It's game over.